Hello and welcome everyone to today's episode of Voices of eLearning. I'm your host, J.W. Marshall with Summit K-12, and with me as always is my co-host, Lena Marie Saleh with Canva. We are so excited that you have joined us for the episode today because we have with us Lisa Rohr, Senior Advisor for Emeritus. Lisa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So good to meet you guys and excited for the conversation.
Same
We're also
here.
very excited.
Yeah, and this is going to be, we always like to have different conversations around the spectrum of e-learning and education. And this is hopefully one that is going to be new ground for us on the show. So we're excited to dive in. But before we get into our topics and our questions, we always like to start the episode with the same two questions for our guest. Rather than reading a long biography of all of your accomplishments, we like to ask, who are you? And not what do you do, but what do you love about what you do?
I work with the university partners at Emeritus, and it's a really wonderful job for me, and I love it because I come from academia originally. I did a PhD in organizational behavior, so in a business school, but decided not to go into a tenure track position. But I really, really love all of the ideas in academia, and I love the idea that the learning and the teaching that come out of academia. And so I've spent most of my career bridging the gap between what happens in business schools in particular, and what happens in real life and how people can use that information. So that's what makes this so exciting for me. I get to spend lots and lots of time talking to universities and hanging out with academics, but also be part of a very fast-growing ed tech startup. Actually, we're not really a startup anymore. We've been around for a while, and we can talk about that. But this is what I'm passionate about, is really working with universities, making learning accessible globally to people that can really use and leverage the learnings that come out of academia. So that's what I'm all about.
Perfect. And we were talking a little bit in the pre-show about COVID and how we hope to not be talking about COVID anymore, but COVID, it's still here, but we're kind of coming out of it. But it really relates because so much has changed in the last couple of years because of it. And a lot of that with alternative credentialing and things. So let's just get it out of the way and talk to us about how COVID has changed people's views of education, in your opinion, and views on earning a degree and the rise of alternative credentials.
Sure. Yeah. And, I should clarify, first of all, that with Emeritus, where we focus is really in this alternative credentials market. So we have built our business from, online, more or less executive education programs or professional education programs, really aimed at working professionals who are looking to upskill. So that's the perspective that I come from as I talk about the impact of COVID on this space. I really think that there is a supply side answer and a demand side answer when you ask me about how COVID changed people's views on education. So we'll start with the demand side because that's probably the most obvious. And there's really no doubt that COVID has really opened people's eyes up to how much can be done by computer versus in person, right? And we see this huge debate going on right now about return to office. People have realized after working at home for a long time that actually they can be quite efficient and effective at their jobs working from home at their computer. And so I really think that is driving an acceptance of online learning as an extension of our discovery that so much can happen virtually that used to be primarily in person. So I think that has really driven a surge in demand for online courses, and when you think about again that return to office debate that people are having, they're really valuing the flexibility of working from home. Online learning provides that same flexibility. It also can be less expensive than traditional classroom programs, particularly when you look at executive education. So this is also partly driving demand in this space. So on the supply side, our chief suppliers are university faculty. So at Emeritus, we partner with top name universities to bring their courses to a global audience. And so our suppliers are these faculty. And before COVID, there were some faculty that really were embracing online learning, but there were also a fair number that were skeptical about online. Obviously, that changed during the pandemic. Everybody was kind of forced into the deep end of the pool. And when everybody had to adapt their classes very quickly to online. So that has just meant that faculty are much more open now to online courses, I think, than they were prior to COVID. And that's enabled our universities to really grow portfolios of online courses and provide more selection and options to potential learners. Now, you also asked about alternative credentials. So we can talk a little bit about alternative credentials in particular and how that's been impacted by the pandemic. I think that what we're seeing really is an acceleration of interest in in alternative credentials. It's not really, it started way before the pandemic, but what's been interesting is to see people's attitudes towards degrees in particular shifting over time. There was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this week, and I don't know if you all saw that, but they reported that in 2019, so this was before the pandemic even, only 51% of American adults considered a college degree to be very important. That's down from 70% in 2019. So it went from 70% to 51% in only 6 years. And that shift was even greater among younger people aged 18 to 29, where only 41% felt a college degree was very important, down from 74% in 2013. So that's just a huge shift in a short period of time, before even the pandemic came in and really turned people's minds upside down. But it really reflects a very fast-growing, shifting mindset around alternatives to kind of traditional education. So that's been something that's been out there for a while. But then I think there were two things that happened in the pandemic. First of all, it caused everybody to question their taken for granted assumptions about many, many things, right? When we all got locked down, we had to rethink a lot of things that we were taking for granted. So I think that has opened people's minds up again in multiple different ways. But the other very important thing that's happened in the pandemic is it's forced so many companies to digitally transform. And again, they were transforming already, but this was such a monumental event that what has happened is that that means that we have huge numbers of people that need to upskill and to learn new things about digital technologies and digital transformation than we did before. So I think that the pandemic has added the urgency around upskilling in a way that was there again previously, but that it accelerated through the pandemic.
And JW and I have actually talked a lot about upskilling and the importance of upskilling, especially when you're already in a workplace, you're already like working, there's places, Canva gives us stipends for continuing our education and making sure that we have the certifications and things to kind of, the skills to continue to thrive, I guess, in the workplace. So how can, the work that you're doing at Emeritus and higher education really help people who are already working to advance their careers?
Yeah, I think there's really two ways that we can do that. And the first thing that makes this an attractive product or experience for people who are mid-career and working is that flexibility. And the way that you create these online courses is, and again, if you think about traditional executive education or professional education, you might take off a week from work, come on campus, have an absolutely transformative experience on campus, but then leave that behind and go back to work. When you're doing a course online, typically those courses are stretched out over time. So that means you're learning a little bit every week. And particularly in our courses, we think it's very, very important to have very applied exercises so that you're taking what you're learning, you're taking it back to your workplace every week and really thinking and practicing the skills that you're learning. So that's something that online is particularly well suited for, and is super, super important for working professionals. I think the other thing that online, and this is actually more of an alternative credential feature, is that it's possible to create new courses much faster when it comes to alternative credentials versus degrees, right? Degrees often involve a lot of time and approvals, and they take a long time to create. Alternative credentials can be done much, much quicker, so they can be much, much more responsive to changing technologies and all of that. So that has been, I think, another advantage to working professionals who really need that up-to-date knowledge. They can't wait for schools to kind of create degree programs around the latest technologies. This can be very targeted, quick, adaptable, and that's much more well suited in many cases for working professionals.
Yeah, and on that note, I actually started an executive MBA program in the fall of 2019, which then became an online MBA in the spring, and for the remainder of the 21-month program. So I know what it's like to do virtual education while being also a full-time parent and working full-time. But talk to us about the role, specifically from your point of view, on what it means to do that virtual education while you're working full-time, while you're being a parent, but you still want to advance your career.
Yeah, I think that as you probably found, it's that flexibility piece of not having to set things aside for hours and hours at a time. Our courses tend to have a mixture of asynchronous and synchronous content, but they're primarily asynchronous. Now, in a degree program, you typically have more synchronous content, but of course there's a continuum of ways that these programs are developed. But that flexibility to be able to do your work and to attend virtual class asynchronously late into the night, for instance, when the kids are in bed and when you're done with your emails from work, the ability to do that, I think, is really, really important in this day and age. And particularly now post-COVID, where work and home and everything is just so much more blended together. I find that a lot of people really value that ability to learn on their own time and when it's convenient for them. So, for me, I really see that flexibility as being really key. And of course, again, different programs are developed differently, but I know for us, and when we're developing these programs, we try to limit the amount of synchronous content in order to make it more accessible for people who do have busy schedules and have to fit it in at odd times and unpredictable times.
And I was afraid that was your answer, because I wish there was a time machine now to go back, because the structure was in the end worth it and rewarding, but very stressful, and especially weekend work while the kids were up was difficult on the spouse and things like that. So I'm so glad to hear that this is really coming to fruition, because for those that are going to be dealing with the same challenges that I dealt with, hopefully without a pandemic on top of it, but just in everyday normal stresses and time commitments of life. This is really exciting that this is becoming mainstream.
Yeah, and I think it really is becoming much more mainstream. If you look at across universities, many of the top schools now have an online portfolio of some kind that they're offering. And increasingly, even on the degree program side, we're seeing more and more schools embracing degrees that are online, of various levels of flexibility, but still, at least you didn't have to leave your house. Even if you had synchronous sessions, at least you could do those from home. You didn't have to travel somewhere else. I know people years ago getting executive MBAs that had to fly to Chicago every other weekend, and that's a huge burden as well. That said, there are huge benefits in being in person and having that connection in the classroom. And for some people, that's the right decision and the right way to go. But there's a lot of people for whom flexibility is really much more important. And so they're going to weigh programs accordingly.
Yeah, that's a interesting perspective, because I think about when I was doing my like undergrad, there was only like a couple of options for like online classes, and they were so nice because I always worked jobs and, put my own self through school. And then I think about my master's program is completely online. There was like no interaction, and the way that the interactions have changed, where it was like, you're just asyncing and you're just taking a course and you're sitting there in a room by yourself solo. And how those opportunities have kind of changed to more of like a networking, more community building within the courses, where it just used to be, you'd sit there, you just do it by yourself. You're going through a whole master's program solo. It can be quite lonely and not that exciting, I guess you would say. But now the programs we're seeing are adapting and like bringing people in and building conversation and building those communities. And I think I've really enjoyed watching that sort of change and adapt, because it's been needed for an eternity of time, I think.
Yeah. And I think professionals especially so value the opportunity to network in some way and to meet each other. I think that is incredibly important. And we're really, I agree with you. We're kind of seeing like the 2.0 now, where those levels of community are being much more focused on and developed. So yeah, hopefully more to come there. I think with
Right.
That's something that's really facilitated by new technologies, and so there's some interesting developments there that I think that will continue to help us.
Agreed. So throughout the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, we started to see more industry-driven certification programs, whether that being Google providing their own industry, certifications and professional certificates and workforce leadership development initiatives. So could you talk a little bit more about that change that has happened?
Yeah, I think it's really an extension of what we've been talking about. But, if we look at it more from the workforce development standpoint, from the companies that have an interest in having people get this education, right? So, and a lot of people are talking about this. It's of course not a new concept, because we've got the corporate training industry more broadly as $160 billion industry in the US, something like that, right? So there's always been a huge need for corporate training, but I think now there's a lot more options than there used to be. So you're absolutely right. We're seeing a lot of companies that are getting into it by creating their own certifications. And that's been super interesting and very, very appealing to a lot of people that really see the tie. They know for sure if you get a Google certificate that your skills are going to be relevant, because Google is such a relevant tool in business, right? I think this is where universities have to kind of prove themselves in some ways, because higher ed has a reputation for being a little bit ivory tower, right? And so how do you ensure that you're getting those practical skills? And so that's something that we've been working with our schools on. We've been creating boot camps, professional certificates that really have a lot of applied practice in them. And sometimes university faculty are not the right ones to be providing that kind of very hands-on practice. It's not where they add the biggest value. So we'll bring in subject matter experts to complement the university faculty in those courses. So yeah, we do see a lot of interest in this, and we see an opportunity for higher education and for universities to really play a part in this. Alongside Google. And some people, there was an article, I think it was by McKinsey, that I was just taking a look at, that they were talking about, could universities and these companies collaborate together to create degrees? I mean, not degrees, but well, I guess you could have degrees, but alternative credentials, certifications, those kinds of things. So you can really get the best of both worlds. And so we're starting to see some interest in that as well.
Which I think is an interesting, JW, I think is an interesting concept, because I've been pushing this for a long time, but like for industry to partner with K-12. So I think it's even more vitally important that industry is partnering with universities, because those are the places where you're really getting those skill sets. All those other, you have the opportunity to learn so many things, but the skill set to really go from higher ed to industry is really important and a missed opportunity. And I'm really glad that they're finally starting to basically open the door and the window to like really bring industry to the table.
Yeah, I do think there's more openness, but we have a little ways to go. But yes,
Yeah.
I think we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, and I was going to just follow up on that. The latest surveys I saw last year, said that 75% of industry didn't feel like college graduates were really prepared with the skills that they needed to perform their jobs. And that's kind of why they started doing some of their own certifications. But it does seem like during the pandemic, I don't know if universities are, just kind of more desperate to keep students in enrollment, but they do seem much more open than they've ever seemed to partner with other organizations, with the industry, to really kind of figure out where this is going next so that they don't, get left behind. So it's exciting to see that. I want to transition a little bit because I'm imagining a lot of listeners today are working professionals, and this may have opened their minds up a little bit to exploring, options for them. And it sounds like there are a lot of options. As we had this discussion today, what advice would you recommend to someone listening today to where do they start to figure out, should I go back for a degree? Should I look for a micro-credential or an alternative certification? What would that kind of decision tree look like for someone that we've piqued their interest today?
That's a great question, because there are so many more options available than there used to be. Of course, with any big decision, it comes down with, comes down to what your goals are, right? And so there is absolutely a time and a place for degrees, right? Degrees, I think the degrees will continue to be important for the foreseeable future. They're too ingrained in society to just disappear. So why would you want a degree? If you're making a fundamental career change where credentials are important in that industry or sometimes required in that industry, then a degree is going to make sense. Now, that's a changing landscape, right? So things like law, for instance, obviously you're always going to need a degree to become a lawyer, but there are other ways that you can get involved in law, not being a lawyer, and that don't require that law degree, right? So it kind of depends on what your goals are, what is required and accepted in that industry going forward. Generally speaking, I think a lot of the technical skills that we're seeing and companies that are hiring technical people are more open to alternative credentials. And I think that that's partly by necessity, because again, tech is changing so quickly. Chances are that by the time you finish your degree program, your skills may already be a little bit out of date. So you can stay on top of those latest skills by doing alternative credentials. So there's obviously going to be a different path for everybody through that decision tree. But those are some of that's some of what I would encourage people to think about as they're going through it. And of course, your financial position is going to matter too, because degrees are a significant financial commitment in most cases that not everybody is able to or willing to take on. So that's another component, of course, that we can't ignore.
Yeah, and the inverse question, any corporate leaders or higher ed professionals that want to engage with learning more about Emeritus, how can they find more information and what does that process look like?
Yeah, so in terms of higher ed folks and corporate folks who are interested in expanding their exposure to lifelong learning opportunities, of course, at Emeritus, we're always happy to talk to you about either one. And there's lots of information on our website. But again, I think that, and I speak more from a higher ed perspective because I spend most of my time with universities. I think universities are seeing two things. First of all, they're seeing they're seeing this decline in interest in degree programs that I referenced earlier, right? Now, that is not touching the top tier, but certainly other universities that are not in the very top tier are feeling that. So they have to rethink some of those assumptions and question a reliance on sort of the brick and mortar degree programs. But I think also a lot of the folks that we work with are actually a little bit peripheral to the university. So the professional education, executive education departments tend to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and a little bit more able to innovate and try new things. So I would say, as a university administrator, if you're interested in becoming more knowledgeable about what's going on, talk to your folks that are in those spaces in your university, see what they're hearing. And these folks also tend to be very close to the market and a little bit less driven by faculty needs, and a little bit more market driven. And so that's something else that I would say is we see a lot of this forward thinking innovation coming out of these departments that have been a little bit peripheral to the core of universities traditionally.
I love it. And that's usually, where it kind of picks up traction. And then other, parts of the university say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And, that kind of thing. Well, I hate that we are running out of time because this has been so great. But we also like to, at the end of our shows, our audience knows, we like to end with a half glass full optimistic story of hope. So give us a favorite story of success in recent years.
Yeah, I think my story goes back to my first involvement with Emeritus, actually. So I came to Emeritus in 2016 when we were first starting to get into online learning. And I was actually a course leader. At Emeritus, a course leader is somebody who is a specialist in the field that is kind of the live facilitator, runs office hours, webinars, provides comments on participant work, that kind of thing. I started out as one of our very first course leaders. And I did that with some leadership and negotiations courses. And so one of the things that I needed to do in that job was to run these webinars. And so the first thing I would always do in a webinar is I would ask people to go into the chat and type in where they're sitting today. Like, what city are you in? Or, where are you today? And invariably, the first 5 responses would be people from 5 really different places: Des Moines, Philadelphia, London, Kenya, Bangalore, Abu Dhabi, Singapore. And it was just across the globe. And you got this sense of being in this global virtual classroom where we're all coming together on a topic of mutual interest. And that global engagement just gives me so much energy because it really shows the global impact that online learning can have. And there just aren't that many opportunities for folks to meet and network and to learn in that type of environment. And I just think it's so powerful. And that is the kind of thing that really gets me excited about what we're doing is that global virtual classroom and how fun that is to be part of that experience.
I love it. We are all more connected now than ever around the world. So, and sadly, my executive MBA program had to cancel its global trip. That's usually a big kind of selling point, but we were able to do a series of global initiatives with people from around the world. And in some ways, it was almost better because we got to not just experience one country and one, experience, but we got to experience a lot of different countries and a lot of different people and exposure to business around the world. So, I'm excited for the future, even more so after this conversation. Lisa Rohr, Senior Advisor with Emeritus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great talking to you.
And to our audience, thank you so much for joining another episode of Voices of eLearning with myself and with Lena. We really appreciate all of your interaction with us throughout each week. Be sure to check out our website for additional episodes and be sure to join us next week. Thank you again, and always keep learning.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.